Hi guys, welcome back to another great episode of the Slick Chick Show.
Hi everyone.
I hope everybody is doing well, and I wanted to say thank you so much for the engagement we received for the 4-part series that we did in March. It was fantastic.
We appreciate your feedback.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
For April, I actually have Lucy on as a guest and not a co-host. Because, as many of you know, Lucy is a breast cancer warrior.
Thank you.
I use that term more than survivor, but I like warrior. And we'll get into you. And what I wanted to do today is interview Lucy on her journey. And she's celebrating 10 years this year of being a warrior. Yay! But I wanted to talk to her and learn more about her story, and there's two reasons for it. Slick Chick Magazine, the platform we're using for the show, was founded with the intention to celebrate the everyday woman and inspirational stories, and Lucy has a very inspirational story that has moved me many a times. And the other part too is she's a brave lady, but she does not share her story so often. Even with me, it's taken a while and I only know it in bits and pieces. So I thought this was a great way to do it and have her tell us more about her story. So my guest for the show today is Lucy Santoro.
Hi everyone.
And we're going to be talking about her journey with breast cancer. And so we're going to get right into it.
Okay.
And
let's do it.
Tell me about your journey with cancer.
Oh boy, where do I start? So it was 9.5 years ago, last 2009, probably June or July. I was sitting around with my sister Pina. We're having coffee, talking, just girl talk, probably talking about clothing and, spring or summer wardrobes. And in conversation, I found the lump. I was just kind of grazing my, clearly I was, fixing my shirt or grazing my breast somehow and found the lump. And it startled me, but I really tried not to pay it any attention and just thought, well, I'm going to wait a month and see if it's hormonal. And sure enough, in August, we were in Montreal at a family reunion, and I'm in the hotel taking a shower and realized the lump was still there. And fear set in at that point. And so we went to the reunion, and I didn't say anything to anybody. So it was just really Pina and I that were aware of what was going on. And shortly after we came back from Montreal, it was my birthday, which I really celebrated in complete fear, even without knowing anything. And 2 days after my birthday, I went to my family doctor and I said, I think my worst nightmare is coming true. And we started from there. By the time I left my doctor's office, who was in Hamilton, I drove to my parents' house. I was living in Toronto at the time. And said, okay, at this point, I will tell my mom and my parents especially what's going on. So I drove the 20 minutes from the doctor's office home, and my parents were having coffee, and they said, why the visit? And I really tried to make it casual, like, surprise, I'm, visiting you in the middle of the week. And clearly my facial expressions could not hide the trauma that I was going through in my mind. And so I told them that I had found the lump, and not 2 minutes later, the doctor called me with tests, appointments to go for the mammogram and ultrasound and see. And so that was sort of the beginning of my journey. So mid-August, and I received the diagnosis. Oh gosh, that's another story in itself. October 13th, so the day after Thanksgiving. Wow. Of 2009. So that's sort of the start of how it all happened.
And then it was a series of chemo
and then it was like robotic mode. It was, I was originally supposed to have surgery. So it was, go and visit the surgeon. And at that point, there was a miscommunication when I was diagnosed with my family doctor. So at that point, I knew very little. So I was going straight from you have breast cancer to let's talk about surgery. And I was like deer in the headlights with the surgeon going, what is going on? So after that appointment, they sent me for more tests. And because of the results of those tests, they realized the cancer was aggressive, and the lump was growing. And so we changed course. And we went from, instead of surgery first, we went to chemotherapy first. So I met an oncologist. But it was very like, today we're doing this, the next day we're doing that. And it was like weeks and weeks of like different procedures, different tests, different doctors. And in the midst of that, my aunt was very ill in Montreal, so my parents left for that. And that was a tragic ending to a very long illness and suffering that she endured. And so it was high emotion
right
at that time.
I can imagine. And I guess my curiosity was, when they diagnosed the cancer, you've said it was aggressive, but was there more information at that point? Did you know what you were dealing with? Because there's so many kinds of cancers out there, and you know what I mean? Like so many.
Right. So of course they tell you don't Google.
Right.
But it's really automatic to someone who's curious.
Yeah.
And as you've watched the show, I'm quite curious. I Googled. And so, yes, it became, after that MRI that determined the cancer was aggressive, I knew at that point that I went from stage 2 to stage 3 in 2 weeks because it had grown a significant amount and spread to my lymph nodes. So that automatically was easy to stage.
Right.
And then it was, they did the hormone test to see if it was estrogen or progesterone positive and all that kind of thing. So I knew that it was estrogen positive, stage 3, with spreading to the lymph nodes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then what did your support system look like at that time?
So when I received, let me backtrack because now I have to explain sort of that miscommunication. So when I went for the mammogram and ultrasound, I was waiting for my family doctor to call me. I was living in Toronto, as I had mentioned. So I was waiting for a phone call in Toronto, and on this particular day.
Right.
And instead, my mom came home from work here in Stony Creek and found a voicemail message from my doctor specifically saying, Lucy, call me. So my mother already sort of had an idea before I did. So I called the doctor saying, you called my house in Stony Creek, not me in Toronto. But in the meantime, my doctor's nurse called me and said, I have your appointment with a surgeon, and I hadn't spoken to anybody. So it was like this huge emotional mess with my family doctor,
right,
who I've known since birth, who felt really bad at that miscommunication. And so once I got off the phone, I knew my mom was in Stony Creek waiting to hear what the doctor had said. So I had to tell her on speakerphone. And it tore me apart. It really just tore me apart. And then I called my sister while she was driving, which in hindsight was a really bad idea, because she's driving on a bridge crying. So, yeah. And so at that point, Pina and I left Toronto and we came here because I knew we needed it wasn't a conversation I could finish on the phone.
Right.
So we drove home that night. So, we became, like, my mother and my sisters and I really became such strong links.
Right.
As far as my extended support, well, I think that's a whole other story in terms of, who's there when you need them.
Right.
But everything happens so fast and the emotions are so charged that I was really thinking about little else than myself. Right. And what needed to get done, what was going to happen, how it was going to impact the family. At the time, we didn't have cancer in my family. Like, there was no history. This was a very odd occurrence. So, I mean, we're never really prepared, but we certainly weren't. Right. Even less than at that time.
Right. And it's a tough one, like you said. I can't even begin to say I can't, right? Like, I don't think anybody can until you're in that situation. Right. And so while all this was happening, what kept you going? What was I'm going to get through this factor?
That's a good question. because I think there were moments where I wasn't sure.
Yes.
In the cancer world, I was considered young. And so I had sort of age on my side.
Just for people watching that,
yeah,
how old were you at the time?
I was 36 at diagnosis.
Okay.
So you do the math, and that's how old I am.
No, but it's important to know. And the
yeah.
reason why I want to say that is because most oftentimes it's not, I mean, now so more so, especially I would say in the last 3-4 years, it's getting apparent that young people are susceptible to cancer, but in 2009, not so much. So it's good for people to know that it's not age.
Right. Which is, it's so interesting, and this is an entirely different conversation, but it's still considered an elder person's disease. And so it's shocking still when young people are diagnosed, young women are diagnosed with breast cancer.
Sorry, so you were saying about what kept you going at the time?
What kept me going? When I was going through treatments, I ended up moving back to Stony Creek. My doctors were here, my support system was here. It made more sense to me. And my mother, she was my nurse, she was my class, she was my clown, she was my support, she was my mother, she kept me going. And it broke my heart to see the suffering in her face. And so I had to maintain that so that she could regain her youth. So my family really kept me going. But I really need to pay homage to my mom, because she did it for me. She's my hero. She's more the warrior in this than I even see myself. I'm so grateful, and quite honestly, I don't know if I would have survived without her. Without that strength that she has, but inner strength and outer strength, and she just went 24/7 with me when I needed to. She knew what my side effects were and what to do to alleviate the pain, and yeah, she was just such a pillar of support.
You're lucky.
I am blessed beyond.
And I think it's just so, no words.
There aren't, and I just can't thank her enough.
I'm sure she loves you just as much.
We were always close.
Yeah.
But it just brought our relationship to another level. We're dysfunctionally codependent, and we love it. I'm totally okay with it, because it's a bond that you just can't break that, and it's not an experience you can forget.
Yeah.
And because we spend so much time together, it changes you in a way that I don't even know. I don't know that I could identify it, and I don't know that she could identify it.
Right.
But I think it's unbreakable.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say was your biggest learning in this journey thus far? Because it is a journey, right?
So I'd have to say that, before I was diagnosed, I was already sort of on a path of personal growth and discovery, and I was already engaged in Reiki and learning even more and more about meditation and that kind of thing. And so when I was diagnosed, for some people the automatic is, why me? Mm-hmm. And for me, it was never that. I never said, why me versus someone else. For me, it was, okay, so what does this mean?
Wow, okay.
So what am I to learn about this? What's the lesson? What's the message? And I, from a spiritual point, I know that, breast cancer specifically is about nurturing the self and self-love. And so that's really been a lesson. And it's an ongoing learning for me on how to carve time out for myself and make myself a priority and set boundaries and, learning how to say no and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And even though it's 9.5 years done, but what do your daily struggles look like?
Well, I think when you go through something like this, there's a little post-traumatic trauma, post-trauma, post-stress that happens. I was having this conversation yesterday with another group of people that are undergoing treatments or sort of in the same journey. And, the days and weeks leading up to that checkup with the oncologist causes a little bit of anxiety, right? And it's not necessarily that I'm anticipating anything because I'm not feeling symptoms of anything.
Right.
But it's the anxiety of going to that place, seeing the people, talking to the doctor, and so there's a wonderance of, is this pain that I have in my back just back pain or is it something else?
Right.
Is this pain and, on my side, you know what I mean? And so there's always this antagonizing thoughts of, is it recurrence? Is it not? And it's not so much that I live in fear, it's that I know that it exists.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've had enough people in my life that, the paths started out similar, but they've ended quite differently. And so I know that there isn't anybody that's immune. And as much as I didn't ask myself, why me? I don't ask myself, why me? Now, because I know that it can happen to anybody. Nobody is exempt.
Right. And so then that leads me to the question about survivor guilt. And we've talked about this off camera, especially with the loss you suffered last year.
Right.
Of one of your really near, dear, close friends, Bonnie.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people that do suffer survivor guilt.
For sure.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I will try and make it through a complete sentence. So when Bonnie was diagnosed, before Bonnie was diagnosed, she was a poster child of good health. She ate well. She moved her body well. She was in fine form. She knew what needed to be done for her body. And so her diagnosis was a complete surprise. And then she metastasized. And I watched her deteriorate in less than a year. And she left behind 2 little girls. So the survivor guilt at that point was huge compared to what I've ever experienced. And that I had to process that. I had to understand why she left and why she didn't survive it and why I did. So I had a conversation with her husband because I wanted to know if he felt that. Why is Lucy here and Bonnie's not? And I had to think about that. And I think the only conclusion that I can come up with is it's not my journey. And was it her journey? Did she know that is how her life was going to end? I don't know. And I will never know until I get to speak with her again.
Okay.
But I just need to find the gratitude in where I am and find the blessings that I have and acknowledge the time that I've had with Bonnie and what her journey was like and how, she lived through her breast cancer so different than I did. And it was always in awe of how much we learned from one another, having gone through it at different times, but supporting one another through it, even all these years later. So I think the survivor's guilt is just something that I work on all the time. And it gets triggered when somebody close to me passes away that I know, or somebody that I've worked with at the cancer support centers. And, the next time I go, they're no longer there. And so you say, okay, what's this mean? What does this mean? And go through it. Like I don't know that I'm ever going to have a day where I don't feel guilty. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what really sticks out is, we tend to box people into similar experiences or circumstances. And what really stuck out is what you said is that, and especially with respect with you and Bonnie, and your journeys were so different. And I think it's important for viewers to know that you may have the same disease,
right,
but the journey on it is so different.
Yes.
And I know how tough it has been for you, losing Bonnie and the emotions through it, and I know what a daily struggle it is for you. Right. And I don't, as a friend of yours, off screen, working with you, a colleague, it does break my heart, but I will never be in that situation, right? And I think and that's why I was asking you to talk about it today, is because I really think people do go through this, and it's important.
Yes.
To address it.
Right.
Because we're not alone in these journeys.
Right. And, you're right. And it sounds cliche to say unless you've gone through it, you don't really know. And cancer is one of those things, it's such a global word, cancer. But even within breast cancer, it's so different with everybody. And that becomes cliche in the community of breast cancer to say everyone's different. So my experience is completely different from someone who, it sounds similar. They start out the same way, the lump is the same size, they have the same doctor, but it's completely different.
Right.
And I know that intellectually, I know that how breast cancer affected me and how it affected Bonnie was completely different. Her body composition is very different. How she metabolized chemotherapy and all the drugs was very different. All the side effects she endured that I didn't, all very different. So it's not a lump sum. And so everything is just it's all just very different.
Right. And so then what would you say are your, for a lack of a better term, your key takeaways that you'd want to share, or some of the most significant learnings, right? But the key takeaways from the journey so far, in terms of inspiration you might want to share, or...
One of them is the opportunity to just be real with yourself. I hear a lot, and I have felt a lot, even in my journey, this whole idea of, you have to be positive through the journey. And as much as I see the relevance in that phrase and in that mindset, I also firmly believe there is space there for me to feel, and to allow myself to feel the trauma, the paralyzing fear, the anger, the confusion, to just create a space. And looking back, I don't think I always did that going through treatments. I think I was quite camouflaging in my emotions to spare my family, in particular my mom. But that's been my greatest healing, is to really allow myself to feel. I was going to say something else and now I forgot. And I think having the conversations, I don't talk, you mentioned at the beginning that I don't talk much about it. And I think it's because it's been my experience that talking about cancer, telling somebody you have cancer, can really silence a room. It's either glazed over, and I've told men who have not said anything or have tried to fix my perspective on it. And I have had women who stopped showing up in my life. But I've also had great experiences of, women empowering me and celebrating my small successes that even I didn't celebrate. So I think it's so important to have the dialogue.
And so then, what would you say to the people that the rooms are silenced in, or when it's glazed over, right? Because from the other side of the room, it could just be the ignorance, or they feel it makes you uncomfortable, or it's
right.
a pain point,
right?
And everybody deals with it differently, right?
Right.
So, but what would you sort of say is a right, or at least a dignified way of handling it? I don't think there's a right way of handling it, but more a dignified way of handling it.
Well, I always feel like, the truth is the dignified way.
Right.
The reality is somebody who's gone through an illness will be triggered.
Right.
So I've had people say, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to upset you. But I've already gone through it. So I've been upset already.
Right.
So by talking about it, yes, it makes me emotional. But if you're uncomfortable by my emotion, then you're not protecting me. You're protecting yourself. Do you know what I'm saying? So if you can engage in a conversation and allow the person you're talking to get emotional, to feel that experience with you as they recount it, then that's the truth. But if you want to ask me to say, you did it, you're rah-rah, and I appreciate that celebratory cheerleader aspect, but that's not a real conversation.
Right.
If you want to know if you really want to know the guts of the experience.
Right.
It's not the rah-rah. It's not the celebratory fundraising runs. That's great. It's empowering, and there's a sisterhood, and that's all beautiful. But the raw story is in the emotion. It's in the experience of the diagnosis, the fear, the side effects. Like, that's the story for me.
Right. But it's also key, I think, to note, I do know other people who've been on not the same journey, but on this journey. And I think it's so personality-based.
Right.
Because I have had the odd situations where I've got the shutdown, right? Like, it's been very clear I don't want to talk about it. Right. And it also could be because of the relationship. Maybe I'm not so close to them. Maybe it's not a space they want to allow me into, which is totally okay. I would just say, from the person on the other side of the table, to take your cue from the person you're talking to.
Exactly.
And not to assume.
Right. And to understand the relationship.
Yeah.
Like, I know somebody else who had cancer, and they sort of numbed their way through it, and they didn't really talk about it, and then it was over. And I've had other people who really identify with that. And I think I sort of fall in between. Sometimes I want to talk about it, and sometimes I don't. I don't want to give this perception that I'm the victim,
right,
or I'm just Lucy with cancer. I'm Lucy, and cancer is an experience that I've had.
Right.
And that takes a while to get through. I think it's an emotional journey, and that's the thing. Maybe the other takeaway is treatments and surgeries and recoveries is only a very small part of the cancer. And it's the healing that happens after. The emotional healing, the mental healing, the putting your family back together, and rebuilding friendships that change when you're going through something like this.
Right.
And to understand that I may look put together, and I am, for the most part, put together, but that this is a journey, and I still have my triggers and my emotions as you are witnessing,
Absolutely. And so then I wanted to sort of close up with, what are some of the initiatives you're taking to contribute to this community? What are some of the things you do for your give back? Like, what's your strength now? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, your inspirational point of view. Because I do feel, like you've said and has come across in the interview, you're really, the healing is a constant, consistent thing happening, and you're on your journey on that.
Right.
So now what are the things that you do to help this community or to contribute to this community?
Right. So I think I got to a point in my experiences over the last 10 years where I knew that I wanted to make a difference. Like, because I had always been asking myself, what's this lesson? What's this message? I knew that it needed to serve a bigger purpose in my life. And so over the last several years, I spent time at one of the cancer support centers, facilitating and co-facilitating breast cancer support groups, and a workshop series that I feel strongly about because it really helped me through my spiritual, emotional healing. And I'm the person in those groups that wants to dig deep because I know that the surface of treatments and side effects is just the surface. And so let's go deeper in your healing so that you can, get to where I am 9 years later. So I've spent a lot of time doing that. I have participated in fundraising events that contribute to research at my local hospital. I have been an ambassador for an organization that offers free care packages to women just starting out on their journey. And most recently, because it will be 10 years since my diagnosis, I've put together a wellness retreat. And I think it's because it's twofold. It's multifold, actually. One of them is I would like to celebrate my 10 years in a very big way with people that I care about. And also because I think I want women to honor where they are. And it's not necessarily that we're survivors, and I don't know that I attach to that word, but it's to celebrate where you are, whether that's just starting out, whether that's you're 2 years in, 5 years in, 20 years in, but that you can say, I had the experience. Whether I survived it or thrived it, or I'm a warrior or I'm not, I'm just this person with cancer still, that you celebrate where you are. Because it's no matter what, it's a story. And I want to honor that. And so we've put together this wellness retreat. You're involved. My sister's Pina's involved for a week in October.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I do find, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story and being so candid about it.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm really glad you agreed to it. I have to tell my viewers, and our viewers rather, she was really apprehensive. I've been telling her, we've been talking about this for about a year now.
Yeah.
Where I've been, can I interview you? Can I interview you? And even before we started the show, I wanted to do it for the magazine.
Right.
And and we all get to our spaces when we get there. And so I'm really, really appreciative.
Thank you.
I'm really glad that you were so candid about it and dug deep.
Yes. Thank you for
on a public platform,
right.
Because I know it's different when you're in a support group and you're surrounded by different people. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I really, as a human being, admire your strength through this entire thing. I was there when you lost Bonnie, and how hurtful that was for you, and how you handled it through, how you continue to show up for her girls and Alex and everybody else around you. I know you don't often see yourself as that strong person, but you are, and I think it's really nice for you to share your journey. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I don't want to end on an emotional note, but we are here, and that is part of the journey too, is the emotion.
Right.
So thank you again.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. I am honored to have finally been able to share, maybe in my most vulnerable time in the last several years. But it really has helped me to realize that I'm more than the cancer. And I appreciate that you've allowed me to share it here in a platform where I have been the host, the co-host, and not just the storyteller. So thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We shall see you guys next month. For April, we're just doing the one episode because it's been really long, and I wanted to give Lucy a chance to share her entire story. Thank you to Kra Company for all our goodie shea butters. I've been using it since spring and it's been lovely. And to Authentic Factor, and we'll see you guys. Please engage in the conversation. If you're struggling with a similar journey or know somebody off, feel free to get in touch with Lucy, whatever the stories
I'm happy
are.
to support.
Yeah, and let's open up the dialogues, and we shall see you again.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.
Take
Bye.
care.